So I love hearing from you on Sunday morning. I love having a conversation with you, and I have a question for us to talk about, but it's actually not going to happen now. It's going to happen more near the end of, It's going to happen at the end of the message. So I'll come back to you in a minute with a question. I would love to just get your participation. We have an interesting morning today. We're in the middle of a series called Joyful, and it's walking through this letter that Paul and Timothy wrote for the church in Philippi. And the subtitle that we haven't really talked a lot about, it's a generous and content life is ultimately what lessons we can learn from this letter. There's some things about what does it look like to live a generous and content life. And so we're at the end of chapter 2 today, and chapter 2 is interesting in the book of Philippians, because when you think of a generous and content life, I think the default, if you were just going to say, how do you live a contented life? Who is the subject matter of the conversation? You, right? And when we think, like the default action or behavior that we have when we think about living a content or a generous life is, I need to spend more time thinking about me because I want to be content. I want to be generous. I want to be joyful. So the subject matter of our conversation is really about me, right? That's the default. And our society reinforces that over and over again. But there's something that we're learning that Paul is teaching us, that Jesus ultimately models for us. And it's not intuitive. In fact, I would say it's very counterintuitive. And that is, if we want to pursue a content or generous life, we have to do something about who the primary subject is, right? But it doesn't make sense, because it's like, hey, I want to be a better math student, so I'm going to study math and get better at math, and then I'll do better on my test. It just makes sense. So why would we ever remove ourselves from being the main subject of the conversation if we want a content and generous life? But somehow there is something going on in this chapter, and I just want you to see it. And Paul lays it out beautifully for us, and he says, if we're pursuing a joyful life that is filled with contentment and generosity, there's something about who the main subject is in the conversation. In fact, Paul goes so far as to say, I think we need to remove ourselves from being in the center. As counterintuitive as it is if we want a content and generous life, we're not the ones that we need to keep our focus on. So we started a couple weeks ago. Pastor Kurt led us beautifully in the beginning of chapter 2. It's one of those passages of scripture that's it's powerful. And so we read a couple weeks ago, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. That doesn't make sense. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the other. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And then there's this famous passage about Jesus not striving to be in position with God, but actually letting that down and saying, no, I'm going to humble myself and become a human to the point of dying. I'm going to put somebody else as the focus of my attention. Jesus is going to put somebody else as the focus of his attention. How does God do that? Paul's trying to help the Philippian church to practice the humility of Jesus. Place Jesus in the center and practice that. Make your community practice based on the humility of Jesus. And so then last week we moved on and we said, Paul continues in 12b. We're just to look at a couple verses that Daniel led us in brilliantly last week. Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to act and will in order to fulfill his good purpose. And then jumping to verse 17, but even if I am poured out like a drink offering, this is Paul, even if I am poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So we see Paul, similarly to Jesus, say, what does it look like to put somebody else in the center? We see Paul having this desire to say, what does it look like for me to walk in the way of Jesus? We see Jesus live this and demonstrate it beautifully, this idea of humility, putting the needs of others ahead of ourselves. And then Paul says, for me to walk in the way of Jesus, I want to be poured out like a drink offering. I don't want this to be me in the center, trying to be a content and joyful person because I want the focus on me. Paul says, no, I want to actually focus my attention on serving Jesus by loving you to the point where I will actually be poured out. Now, a question that comes up, and this is where we're going to go for the last part of this chapter. How does a community shape itself around the humility of Jesus? Like, really? Like, is that actually something we can do? Is that something that is at all practical, or is this just a good theoretical conversation for us to say, wow, good discussion at church today, now I'm going to go live my life? What does it look like for us to say, is there some things we can do to say, how do we shape our faith community, our church family? How do we actually shape that around the humility of Jesus? And this is, I think, where Paul is going in the last part of chapter 2. It's an interesting passage that we're going to talk about today. Because ultimately what Paul does is he says, we see the example of Jesus. I reinforce to you, Philippian church, what it looks like for me. I'm all in, Paul says. I'm all in. I work out my salvation. I'm pouring my life out as a drink offering. I'm all in. But now I want to show you a couple of examples of what this looks like in real life. And Paul says, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of friends of mine, people, Philippian church, that you're familiar with. We're going to talk about first Timothy. He's our first example, and I want you to see how he does it. So that when we as a church, we Brentview, can say, like the Philippian church, man, there are ways that we can engage and practically demonstrate ways as a church family that we can center our community around the humility of Jesus. So let's jump in. Paul's first example, as they say, is Timothy. Starting in verse 19. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I may also be cheered when I receive news about you. Friends, I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For whoever looks out for their own interest, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. This sounds a bit confusing for a second, but we're going to dive in and kind of clarify this. But I want to start with this idea of there's no one else like him. Timothy is special to Paul. Paul met Timothy in a town on his first missionary journey, and Paul shared the story of Jesus. And Timothy met Jesus through Paul. And then Timothy's life was changed, and he's like, there's something about this. In fact, there's not just something about this, interesting, now I'm going to go to work. There's something about this as if my life has changed. I want to be a part of this movement. This whole kingdom of Jesus thing just changed everything about me. And so then Timothy eventually starts following Paul and engaging in his ministry and in the ministry of Jesus. And he starts going around with him. As a matter of fact, in Acts 15, 14, 16, when the church in Philippi was formed, Timothy was there with Paul as it happened. So he was part of the team, and he saw the church in Philippi kind of come into being. Later, he continued to fall. In fact, he became like a protege of Paul. Eventually, Timothy becomes a key leader in the church in Ephesus. And you see this development, this change in Timothy's life. He says, I have no one else like him, he says. Now, there's an interesting word that he uses when it says no one else like him. And as a matter of fact, this word is not used anywhere else in the New Testament. The word means equal souled or like souled. We are of the same mind. We are of the same spirit, Paul says. I don't know if there's a higher compliment that Paul could give Timothy. He's like, we are of this. He has walked with me. We are so connected in how we think that we are like same-souled. We are like the same person in our pursuit of Jesus and his kingdom. So he says, I have no one else like Timothy. C.S. Lewis says, true friends don't spend time gazing into each other's eyes. They may show great tenderness towards each other, but they face in the same direction, toward common projects, goals, above else, towards a common Lord. So the question is, what are they like-minded about? And we see more as we continue on. Paul is holding Timothy up as an example of the attitude he has urged the Philippians themselves to adopt in the beginning of chapter 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, value others above yourselves, look to the interests of others. He started, that's what Jesus does. It is the attitude which is best demonstrated by Jesus. Paul says to the Philippians that Timothy has learned through the gospel the art of putting others before himself. And it is thereby fit not only to speak, and is thereby, let me try that whole sentence again. Paul says to the Philippians that Timothy has learned through the gospel the art of putting others before himself and is thereby fit not only to speak the gospel, but also to stand as a model of what it means. So Paul is saying, friends, I want you to look at the example of Timothy. You know this guy. You've seen him. Timothy was seeking Christ, so he was selfless. Selflessness is the way of Jesus. The way you treat other people is what differentiates Jesus' followers. The way we care for others is what shows that we're like following in the footsteps of Jesus. In fact, Jesus said, "Man, if you want to know who my followers are, if you want some way of like being of seeing, like what does a Jesus follower? It's the way in which they treat other people. It's how they love one another. That's what sets them apart." I appreciate N.T. Wright's observation about this passage. He says, notice particularly how looking after King Jesus' interests and genuinely being concerned for your welfare rather than his own are for Paul two ways of saying the same thing. Let's take a look at this verse again, if we can. The one before that. My bad. So, for I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. Something that's unique about Timothy is he will show sincere and genuine concern for who you are as a people. You already know that about him. He cares. He sees. He lives a sincere life, but he lives it for you. He will show genuine concern. And then he says, for everyone, again, the default, right? The default for most people is, I'm going to look out for myself. Even if I'm pursuing a joyful life, I'm going to look out for myself. And Paul acknowledges, he says, for everyone looks out for their own interests. That's just what people do. But he contrasts, he says, but Timothy instead looks out for the interests of Jesus Christ. And then there's this interesting connection. Pursuing the interests of Jesus Christ is synonymous with showing genuine concern. Sorry, if we can go back again. Synonymous with showing genuine concern for your welfare. So, and I think sometimes in church world, we kind of have this idea that like, oh, me and Jesus are okay. I can't stand my neighbors, but me and Jesus are okay. I think Paul challenges the notion here. He's like, no, what does it mean to pursue the way of Jesus? Well, it's actually showing genuine concern for the welfare of others. That's what the humility of Jesus looks like when it's lived out in a faith community or when it's lived out in a community. We don't say, oh yeah, God and I are good, but no, the people that I have to hang out with, really? Are you really part of this church? Do I have to talk to you? No. We show genuine concern for one another. That's what it means to follow Jesus and walk in the steps of having the humility of Jesus. So Paul continues, but you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Paul describes Timothy's attitudes and then describes his actions. So he says this is not just something that he shows concern, he actually shows care and he demonstrates it. He actually lives this out. Paul simply reminds the people of Philippi, you've seen him in action. He's a man of character. He's the real deal. He is a person of character. He is like a son to me. He has acted like a son to me. Timothy has learned. He took time to learn. He put himself in position of being a learner and a follower. That's just what he did. There is something really valuable here for young leaders. And I want to take a moment and just, if you're a young leader or if you're working with young leaders, there's something really powerful here that Timothy doesn't just, in a society that's instant and we want stuff right away, Timothy did not show this attitude of, I've been here for a week, Paul, when's it my turn to lead? And I think sometimes that sneaks in, right? And not just for young leaders, for all of us. Sometimes we're like, hey, I'm ready for that promotion now. And there's something valuable in here about what Timothy modeled for us and for the church in Philippi. He faithfully served. In fact, it was his faithfulness in learning and growing and following that actually became the key instrument in what led to fruitfulness. So he walked in step with Paul. He learned, he followed. He decided to say, I want to learn the way you do it to a point where you would actually one day say to my church or to the church that we are like-minded. I want to follow you to that level. And he proved himself because of his commitment to follow Paul and his commitment to follow Jesus, that it started to change who he was, and it led to a faithful life that led to a fruitful life. So what do we see from the life of Timothy? When we take a look at these examples, what do we see that we can kind of learn from? So how do we as a community, is there anything in here for us? And I think there is. The humility of Jesus is lived out in community when people are like-minded in their genuine concern and care for others. Let's keep going. But I think it is necessary to send back to you. So he continues. So with Timothy, we see this idea of being like-minded, and we see this idea of, again, Timothy demonstrating his genuine concern for the people of Philippi. So we carry on with number 2. Our second person, his name is Epaphroditus. But I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you send to take care of my needs. Epaphroditus was part of the Philippian church, so they knew him well. He was known and trusted. And they have a financial gift that they want to bring to Paul. And they're looking for somebody that they can trust. So they're like, Epaphroditus, we trust you. We know you. You've got character. You're a man we can trust. Would you take this gift to Paul? Now, for some context, Paul was in prison, as we know, and was waiting for his sentence. Now, what's interesting here is when people were in prison in Paul's world, they were not normally given food by their captors. It's a very different society, right? Here we're like, no, the rights of the criminal. Rights of the criminal. This is Rome. You have no rights. So often, they needed friends to help them out. So since Paul probably couldn't be carrying on his tent-making business while in prison, he was completely dependent on support. So the fact that people from another country would raise money and send one of their number on a dangerous journey to carry to an imprisoned friend speaks volumes of the esteem and love that they held for Paul, right? So Paul's favorite term, as we move on with the text, it is necessary to send back to Epaphroditus, my brother. So Paul often refers, when he's talking about his friends, people that are on mission with him, or friends of his, he often uses this word sibling. So he calls somebody a brother or sister. But then there are some of those that are a little bit closer. They're part of like the inner group. And for that, he uses this word co-worker. And this is an interesting term. Paul's favorite term for his inner circle was this word co-worker, or synergoi. Paul describes Epaphroditus as a co-worker or fellow worker. So this word synergoi, or synergos, is the Greek word here. And what does the word look like, especially the second one? Is there a word that we have in English that kind of reminds us of this? Synergy, exactly. So we get our word synergy from this word. So there's this idea of Epaphroditus was synergous with Paul. They worked well together. They they complemented one another. It was like they were on the same team. So when Paul is referring to Epaphroditus, he says, I have synergy with this guy. He's a coworker. We're on mission together. And so this is just an interesting question. I was presented with this question. I want to pass it along to you. And it's basically this. Who do you have synergy with when it comes to experiencing and sharing the kingdom of Jesus? I just found that to be a bit of a shocking question. Who do I have synergy with, or who am I creating synergy with when it comes to experiencing and sharing the kingdom of Jesus? Often we find synergy with people when we serve with them. That was the case of Paul and Epaphroditus. They served together and they found synergy. And again, this is one of those things that I think is just helpful for us to kind of go, man, when it comes to my church experience, am I growing in synergy with people? But who specifically am I growing in synergy with? Are there people in this faith community that you would say, well, of course I am? Or is there people you're like, yeah, that's a step still probably that I have to take. I need to be walking in synergy with people because we are co-workers in pursuit of the same kingdom. So you can create synergy by becoming aware of the needs of others. So Carol Ann and I, just with our family, we've looked for different ways to say, how do we create synergy with our kids in this whole idea of pursuing, experiencing, and sharing the kingdom of Jesus. So we've had opportunities in the past to be able to, and currently, to be able to say, hey, we're going to have people over, but we want to be in this together. We want to do this as a family. And probably the best example I can think of is years ago, with Brentview, we had an opportunity with a few other families to serve together. And we went with Gary and Joanne Edwards on something called a family adventure. We went to Mexico. And what was really fascinating about this whole experience as a parent is to watch the generations from our church, representatives of the generations of our church, come together and to create synergy. Because there was grandparents looking after parents, and there was parents looking after teenagers, and there was teenagers looking out for smaller kids. And there was smaller kids just absolutely stealing the show and delighting all of us. It was remarkable. It was absolutely remarkable. It was this beautiful picture of family coming together in pursuit of the kingdom of Jesus, sharing Jesus and just sharing genuine care and concern for people who were strangers to us, many of them, but they were not strangers to Gary and Joanne, the missionaries in Mexico. And so we showed care, but it was this beautiful picture of saying, we want to do something together to create synergy. We want to serve together. For us as a family, let me just say, for me as a dad, this is one of those highlights I look back as a parent. My oldest son at the time was a teenager, and he was really asking those questions like, what does faith have to do with life? Can somebody help me? Like, we spend a lot of time in church talking. What are we doing? And he's a teenager, just got some angst inside of him, right? And it's some good questions. I remember at the time, like, those are good questions, son. Go talk to your mother. But in the middle of that, being able to be in Mexico serving a family by cleaning garbage out of their yard. And just the level of intensity, honestly, in his eyes, as he just filled bag after bag of garbage bags with garbage. And he's like, I'm doing something in the name of Jesus. And we want to be, as a church, we want to have synergy in how we're coming together to say, we believe the heart of Jesus is for our city and for our world. What does it look like for us to rally together, to join hands and say, we are going to do this in a like-minded and way with synergy? That is just who we're going to be. We're going to be those people. And it was a powerful experience. And I want to encourage you, look for those opportunities. It was life-changing for me and for our family. But again, this is like, sometimes we can try to lead initiatives as the church, but like, look for those opportunities. I encourage you, I implore you, as a family, as a young adult, as like, where are the ways that I'm going to just step in and say, I'm looking for people with synergy? And you might not find it with every person. You might serve with somebody and go, I'm going to keep looking. Whatever. Just keep serving, keep finding people to create synergy and work well, but serve in pursuit of the kingdom of Jesus. Let's keep going. For he longs for you, for all of you, and is distressed because you heard he was ill. So we're talking about Epaphroditus again, right? So he's distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and actually almost died, but God had mercy on him, and not only him, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. So on the way, or after he arrived, Epaphroditus gets sick. His sickness lasts long enough for the Philippian church to hear about it. So he's been sick for a little while, right? It takes a minute for news to go back and forth. Now, the outcome of this is Epaphroditus is distressed because the people back home heard he was sick. So there's something about the compassion in this man's heart, right? So sick he almost died. The people in Philippi are concerned. Epaphroditus is distressed, and Paul is just thankful that he's been spared a heap of sorrow. Now, there's something significant about this, and it's fairly obvious, but I think it's worth stating. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but Epaphroditus gets really sick. But there's a number of people that are involved in his support system, right? And this is significant. The support you need from a strong community when life gets hard really needs to be in place before life gets hard, right? The support system you need when life gets hard, because sometimes life just gets hard. And in a book filled with encouragement for us to be joyful people, Paul just acknowledges sometimes life gets hard, and we just know it. And it's not a be happy moment, it's a life gets hard moment. But in those moments, we need community. And in those moments, Epaphroditus had community. But let me tell you, friends, it's really hard to build community in those moments. There's the inner wrestle that goes in your own mind. It's like, oh, yeah, but how do I now reach out to people? I'm going to feel like and then you've got other people going, we just don't know how to help. So can I just say, when we're not in the middle of crisis, we often put off our need to get into healthy community. And then when we're in crisis, we find ourselves going, now what? So for all of us, let me just say as boldly as I can, when things are okay is the ideal time to pursue healthy community. It's just when we have to build it. Not because we're desperate for it, but because it's just part of what it means to walk in step with the family of Jesus in pursuit of walking in the humility of Jesus. There's a genuine concern and care that we have for one another, and we're a part of that. So how do we step into that? And again, not wait for the times to get desperate, but for right now, today, this fall, getting plugged in and say, I'm gonna dig roots, and I'm going to be in community here. That's just what I'm going to, if this is your church family, build community here. And let me just challenge, for those of you who come on a Sunday morning and say, yeah, this is my community. I want to challenge you to, it's the way that our church is structured, it's hard to build community by just being here on a Sunday. And I don't say that as if it's not a judgment, it's not a condemnation, that's not what it's intended for at all. But it's hard to build community when you have short, quick conversations on a Sunday morning. And the structure or the strategy that we as a church have is to say, man, somehow this has to go from a one-way conversation to me being in my home with a few friends, like maybe a dozen people. And we need to make this one-way conversation very much two-way, and it needs to be dynamic, and we need to get into each other's lives, and we need to say, can we go for coffee? Or let's have a meal together, or let's connect into our group, our one group. Because it's a powerful way for us to be able to say, let's continue to push into building healthy community. Paul continues, therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and may have less anxiety. So again, he's well, right? And you're going to see that. So then, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor people like him. We're going to unpack that in a second, because he almost died for the work of Christ. This man's committed to the cause. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves in that moment could not even give me, but Epaphroditus sure could. I want to just park on this whole idea of honor for just a minute. Honor in, well, let me just read. So Nijay Gupta writes this. It's just really interesting. Another feature we know about Roman Philippi is that the city cherished the Roman value of honor, perhaps to a fault, he says. In the Greco-Roman world, honor was the most prized commodity. It involves the social recognition and acknowledgement of one's social standing. Evidence for this value is literally all over the place in the remains of Philippi today. We have discovered at least 700 inscriptions in the area of Philippi. Nearly all of these inscriptions were symbols of public honor, seeking to raise and display the status of a person, whether they were elite or a commoner. So just before we move on here, so there's this notion in Philippi, which is very much influenced by Rome. We value honor. We think honor is important. But honor is very surface level, and it's something that you esteem to or arrive to or work towards so that you can be recognized publicly by others. So that whole public declaration and sometimes surface level declaration of honor is what the people of Philippi pursued. The author continues, and this is fascinating. Paul was redefining their honor system. Life was like a big ladder leading to a higher status and rank. One naturally had to climb over others and even try to knock them off the ladder to get to the top. What Paul proposes in Philippians then is rather remarkable. In chapter 2, verse 3, that's this whole idea of in humility, value others above yourselves, back to the humility of Jesus. He tells them to stop looking up the ladder. Instead, look down. Even more than that, Paul advocates climbing down the ladder and pulling other people up. Isn't that a beautiful picture? We are enamored with success in being better than our neighbor so that we can receive honor, we can feel puffed up. Paul says, I want to flip that whole thing on its head. You want to walk in the humility of Jesus? Instead of pursuing higher on the ladder, look down. Where are those below you? Is there any way that you can pull them up? Can you put their concerns ahead of yours for a moment? And that's what it looks like to walk in the humility of Jesus. Epaphroditus was one of those kind of people. He modeled what the humility of Jesus looks like in his community. Now, friends, we have so many people in our church who model this brilliantly. They just do this well. They serve well. They show genuine concern and care for others. So I went to a couple staff members this week and I said, hey, can you help me out? Can you just give me a list of some of the people? Who are people that just serve and they're not looking for honor? But we need to honor them. Who are some people who serve because they show a genuine concern and care for others? Now, we have some great staff, and they did a good job. So I got a list that's way too long for us to share this morning. But I'm going to read a few of them. And then as I'm reading, I want you to be thinking about who are people that just need to be honored in our church family. And in a moment, I'm going to read a few, and then I'm just going to stop reading. I'm going to ask you, who are people that need to be honored in this community? People who show genuine concern and care for others. And that's just how they live their life. And in a moment, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to just ask you to just yell out a few names. If you're going to share what they do, which you can, you're limited to one sentence. You can't take 45 minutes. They don't need that much honor, for goodness sakes. Just kidding. You know what I mean. We're time limited. So, a couple names, and this is in no apparent order. It was just the names that were at the top of the list of a long list. And I'm just going to call out a few people, and then we're going to do this together, okay? Michelle Naundorf helps out behind the scenes with food, cooking, hampers, looking for ways to use food to build up and help community. Those are the words. I didn't tell our staff what the text even was. But isn't that just fits, right? That's just how she lives her life. Jennifer Rempel loves to welcome people, help connect people and each other. She does an amazing job at it. She's on our host team. Brilliant. Debbie Anenjumba. Oh, sick. I had this. I killed it. Anenjumba? I'm saying that wrong. Debbie, I apologize. I actually did look at this and I'm still killing it. So this is a really unhonoring moment for you, and I apologize. But she loves to pray for people. She's on the host team. She stands at the back door. She has the biggest smile you're ever going to see. She loves to pray for people and connect with people, especially new people. And I want to give you a moment. Who's some people that just care well?
Diana Pike.
Diana Pike. Do you have a sentence? No? It's okay.
Just with the hampers
Diana Pike serves. She puts together hampers at Kingdom Coffee. I had a conversation with her a little while ago. She says, it's like one of my most favorite parts of my week. Putting food together for other people so that they can eat. It's amazing. Diana Pike is awesome. Declan and Rashi. I'm just going to repeat it just so people online can hear. Beautiful. Daniel, why?
With the adults Bible class this morning and facilitating Alpha courses and the Stampede breakfast. Just lovely people.
Beautiful, beautiful. Alpha courses at a breakfast this morning, which these guys helped with. Declan and Rashi, well done. Thank you. Thank you for all the ways that you serve around here. Beautiful. Jason. Jason Louie is like super volunteer. I tell people this all the time. Wow, like we can clap for Jason Louie. It's fantastic. Jason, you're brilliant. I would share all the ways that Jason has been involved and is involved at Brentview, but then I would take 45 minutes. So Jason, thank you for all of the ways that you serve, my friend. David Shaw, beautiful. Spreading the happiness. David Shaw spreads happiness everywhere he goes. This is good. Let's keep going. We've got a few minutes here. The Edwards. Is that Robin and Virginia Edwards? Okay. Do you have a sentence?
Longevity in service and welcoming newcomers.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's been Robin and Virginia Edwards. I don't think I've ever met anybody as intentional with helping somebody from another country get connected into the life of a church. And like, how do we help you get connected here? It's absolutely remarkable and beautiful. I think we need to clap for Robin and Virginia Edwards. Fantastic, thank you. Judy and Dale Cooper. That is fantastic. Do you have a sentence? I've got lots for them.
Hospitable and library and drinks.
Yep. Judy and Dale Cooper, the list goes on. They've served in so many different areas from the library. They make and serve coffee regularly, big smile on their face. He's actually on the board. Judy has served in the library for years. Again, another fantastic couple.
Kluber and Christiani.
Kluber and Chris?
His wife, Christiani.
Beautiful.
How they
Yep.
and cook for food and bring people.
Serve and cook. If you're looking for a good meal, should I say that out loud? Sorry, guys. Ask first. Don't just show up at their house. Did I hear who? Sorry? Julie Peters is a volunteer development director at Brentview, and she volunteers as a staff member. What else do we need to say? But she intentionally looks for places for you to serve so that you can find a place so that you can help build synergy with other people. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Julie, you're amazing. Somebody else said something back here. I'm sorry. Sorry? Pete and Blake. For worship. We have amazing worship volunteers all over the place, and Pete and Blake are two of them. They're fantastic. Pete does a great job of bringing that whole team. Thank you guys for all of that whole world. There's a lot of work that goes in. They just don't show up. Although they're talented, and they might be able to get away with it once or twice, they just show up on a Sunday. These guys practice, they learn, they spend a lot of time getting ready, so beautiful. Craig and Lorelei, we heard like over and over again over here. Craig and Lorelei, I had their names written down too. Craig and Lorelei Vanderhyde help with young adult ministry. They have served with student ministry. They've served in many, many areas. They put in time with production. They lead a one group. They've led with worship ministry. They're an amazing family. They support other young families. They're fantastic people. Can we thank Craig and Lorelei Vanderhyde? Sorry? Student ministry. And who? Jody. And we have some amazing staff. I just want to make sure, I would love to, they do get some, Jody and Scotty are both brilliant. I'm not trying to stop here, for goodness sakes, they need to be honored. They're brilliant people. But there's a whole lot of people that sometimes just don't get seen. So I want to who are some people that we just, and we're going to move on in a minute. But friends, this is our church family demonstrating genuine concern and care for one another, and it's significant. It really is significant. Any last call. All the people doing sound production, it's beautiful. There's so many people that are involved in sound and production. That's just a whole shout out to all of them. We have a whole team of children's ministry volunteers that serve regularly for the purpose of helping the next generation see the humility of Jesus, because they model it regularly. And I shout out to all of our kids ministry leaders. Along with that, before we even acknowledge them, I want to shout out to our student ministry leaders. I was thinking, man, who is an example in this church of people that demonstrate synergy? They build synergy, they walk in it. And I can't think of a better example than our student ministry volunteers. They do a fantastic job of coming together and saying, this is too important for us to not be here, and show up. So student and kids ministry, all the volunteers, can we just acknowledge all of the work that they do? Okay, we're going to keep going. I realize that we took a little bit longer than I was planning on, but guys, this is so important. It is so important. Because as a church family, the best way we can step into exploring how we walk out or live out the humility of Jesus is by being of one mind and showing genuine concern and care for one another. Now, how do we do this? I have two application points really quick, and then we're going to stop. What does it look like for us to do this as one mind? Is it possible for hundreds of people actually to rally around anything? Is that actually possible? I think it is. So the application is actually a joint application. It's a together goal. In fact, there's two of them. I didn't come up with these. If you were at the last church meeting, Pastor Kurt walked us through two goals that we have for this year, and it fits perfectly into this message. And I'm going to tell you what our two goals are. One goal is we want to see more people engaged in healthy, strong communities. So we've set a goal to increase the number of people that are participating in one groups this year. And why is that? So some number can get bigger? No, it has nothing to do with a bigger number. We believe that showing and demonstrating the humility of Jesus is when we roll up our sleeves and show genuine concern and care for one another. And the best vehicle in our church to do that is one groups. We believe that it's an effective strategy. And so I just want to say, I think it would be amazing if we had 100% participation in one groups this year. Meaning you're included in that number. If you're visiting, you're welcome. You don't have to sign anything. We're not committing you to anything. You're okay. You can leave safely. We won't harass you. If you call Brentview home, I want to encourage you to strongly consider being in a one group this year. A couple weeks ago, Pastor Jody spoke, and she talked about her application was vulnerable community, and she mentioned one groups. And I think what better way for us as a church to rally together and say we are like-minded in this. We don't want anyone falling through the cracks in this family. We want space for everyone, and that means wouldn't it be phenomenal if every person in this room watching online had a place to go every week to meet for coffee, to have a meal together, to share Jesus, to talk a little bit about the message from Sunday and say, is it even relevant for you? Let's talk about that back and forth. And what does it look like for us to build and share and create community together? So that's a goal. And I want to unapologetically state out loud that is a goal that we have. So if you are not in a one group, I want to encourage you to get into one. If you're in a one group, I want to encourage you to dive deeper. We just want to see one groups just continue to grow because it's a sign of healthy community. Now, goal number 2. Again, if you were at the meeting, you heard this. This year, we want to encourage or assist more people than ever to volunteer and serve alongside our mission partners. So we just want to see the level of serving our neighbors. We want to see that just continue to climb. So we have a goal this year to say, what if we said as a church, we want to practice being for our city? Like really practice. And so we've set a goal to say, what if we could encourage more people, more than we've ever thought possible, to engage with our mission partners in serving the needs of our city? So there's two events I'm going to tell you about really quick. First of all, I want to encourage you to be at the September 14th Volunteer Training Day, because you're going to have an opportunity to hear about these two things in greater detail. But I'm going to give you just the Coles notes here, right? On October the 6th, This was Pastor Kurt's idea. I just want to tell you about it. Some of you heard about it already. He's going to tell you more. We're going to have a Serve the City Day, where as a church, we're going to come together, we're going to meet, we're going to have a time of worship, we're going to have a short, challenge, and then we're going to go serve our city. We're going to go on some prayer walks, and we're going to go serve, pick up garbage, and care for our neighbors as part of our worship experience here on October the 6th. Mark your calendar for it. We just want to see as many people as we can, hundreds of us, going into our neighbors, going through the streets of our neighborhood, praying and blessing. Just praying and blessing. And then later on that month, on October the 18th, one of our mission partners is Hope Mission. Guys, these are amazing. I'm not going to take a long time, but they've shared their heart with us before. Tim and his team at Hope Mission are brilliant people. We had, as a staff, we had a chance to go and just walk through their facility and hear Tim's heart. Man, he just has stories of Jesus showing up, and as they serve, you want to talk about synergy? It's beautiful, beautiful. So on October the 18th, they're having a community Thanksgiving dinner. And we have already said to them, the people of Brentview, can we be in? Can we help? So there's going to be opportunities for you to sign up for that day to serve. We're going to need 25 people at least. That could be a couple one groups. There'll be plenty of opportunity, but mark your calendar, October the 18th. If you can be there, it's a great opportunity for you to create synergy around the kingdom of Jesus and offering a cup of water in Jesus' name to some people who need it and would be honored by it. But this is not the only time you're going to hear this year. We've got 2 goals. We're going to keep talking about them because we believe we want to put Jesus right in the center. And as not default, what's the right word there? It's just not my regular default pattern. I want to put myself in the center. But as a church, we want to keep saying, no. The humility of Jesus forces us to remove ourselves and we put him in the center. And that shows up by our genuine concern and care for others. And then we want people who demonstrate that we are for our neighbors. Let me pray for us. God, I thank you that you are good, and I thank you, Jesus, for the examples of people like Timothy and Epaphroditus. And although they lived so long ago, their example is just so poignant for us as examples of what it actually looks like to walk with you. What does it mean for me to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and how do I do that? And God, I thank you for the example of these 2 men. And ultimately, Jesus, I thank you for the example that you gave us, that you went so far as to say, I'm going to put the world's needs ahead of my own. And I'm going to go to a cross. And Jesus, we just want to pause for a moment and honor you for leading the way and showing us what this really looks like. And friends, if there's anybody that doesn't know Jesus, I want to encourage you to talk to somebody you came with. If you don't have anybody to talk to, please come and talk to me. Talk to one of our staff members. We want to help you discern what it means to walk in step with Jesus. So God, I thank you for your leadership. Jesus, we want to continue to honor you and lift you up. I thank you for the opportunity for us to come together and lift you up. Continue, Jesus, to be our banner. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.